And no country, even the US, have found so far a satisfactory solution. So hydroelectricity affects the aquatic ecosystem, as I said. Wind energy affects landscape. Solar energy may affect landscape, but also it might use a lot of good arable lands. There are now conflicts in some countries between the use of land for agriculture and for solar energy. So there are no neutral energy. All energy have their environmental impact, and this should be taken into account when defining a policy mix. What is obvious in the Mediterranean, this I'm coming to the conclusion. What seems obvious in the Mediterranean country? First, they have to take action. They have to take action, and with a strong interest to control and diminish, if possible, the share of fossil fuels in their policy mix. This should be a priority, both for global to cope with the climate change issue and for local interests. Let me remind the level of urban air pollution in Cairo, in Istanbul, in a lot of, mainly in Tel Aviv, in a lot of, in Roma, in Athens, everywhere. So there is a strong local and global interest for our countries to cope with the burning of fossil energy. And also for long-term economic and political interest. So the priority should be, of course, given to energy saving, reducing energy intensity, and increasing energy efficiency, which so far we didn't open, which was not a priority so far in the region. And then comes a different option. So different options, as I said, solar, nuclear, and this we will address all these issues during our meeting. So when it comes to nuclear energy, I would say 2 or 3 words about it. First, we should never forget that we are in a seismic region. 7 nuclear plants are stopped in Japan since 3 years, I think, due to a very strong earthquake. So we have a lot of seismic region in Turkey, in Greece, South Italy, Algeria, South France, and sorry, Israel I don't know. So this is a big parameter for the development. Then we have the governance issue. We should not forget that under the IEA, the Energy Agency in Vienna, there are now international treaties on the way of processing, legally speaking, and in terms of safety with nuclear energy. Especially, there is room for an independent body which will control. So nuclear body means a certain level of democracy, because what means to be independent in a non-democratic country is the big issue. Also the obligation to communicate all incidents to the neighbors. This is another convention, 1994, which was adopted after Chernobyl. So all Mediterranean countries which would like to adopt nuclear energy will have to cope with IEA rules and conventions, and especially the Convention on Nuclear Safety 1994. And finally, nuclear energy needs an adapted environment, a scientific and engineering adapted capacity. So hydroelectric, the room for developing hydroelectric in the region is very the potential is very low. So of course, the solar energy case has a powerful potential which so far has not really exploited. So this is, as I feel, the background, not the policy, just the background for defining the policy. Thank you.
I feel more comfortable than being seated. So the topic I will try to address is about electricity. and mainly the role electricity can play in a sustainable development policy. And first of all, I will briefly remind you of some facts which are well known. You know that most of governments have embarked into very ambitious objectives as regards 2050. Of course, these are aspirational objectives. But the reality is not that. The reality is that, the emissions, the CO2 emissions, the greenhouse emissions are stagnating and sometimes increasing very rapidly in developing countries. Well, clearly we are not in line with the objectives which have been adopted by most countries for 2050. And the pledges taken by most countries after the Copenhagen meeting are not in line with the 2015 objective, 50 objective. Electricity is in a very paradoxical situation, because clearly today a very important portion of the increase of the CO2 emission is due to electricity generation, in real terms and in percentage. In Europe, in Asia, in all the countries. So electricity is responsible for most of this increase. And at the same time, the solution may come from electricity. So why? This is totally paradoxical. Why? It's a question of thermodynamics. Maybe some of you have some memories about the second principle of thermodynamics. But that's very important, because most people make a confusion between the energy crisis, the energy issues, and the climate issue. This is totally different. Climate issues, it's not a question of, has nothing to deal with depletion of resources. Climate issues is a question of entropy. It's a question of disorder which is introduced by the human activities. I remind you that it took 100 million years for the sun, for the Earth's heat, 100 million years to transform the CO2 in the atmosphere into the oil fields and the oil and the coal fields. And now the man is putting everything into disorder. But thanks to electricity, we can work around the second principle of thermodynamics at the generation level and at the end user level. Maybe, it's not sure, that's all the debate. Today the situation is very, very bad. We are very far from a low decarbonized power sector. And a totally decarbonized power sector is absolutely indispensable if we want the target of 80% of CO2 emission reduction to be reached in 2050. It's very easy to demonstrate, because we will still need CO2 emission for certain applications such as chemical industry, such as transportation. So if we want to reach this ambitious target of 80% of CO2 emission reduction in 2050, that means that the power sector must be almost totally decarbonized. And today the situation is very far from that. The carbon factor, that means how much CO2 you are currently emitting for producing 1 kilowatt per hour. This carbon factor depends on the country. It's still very high in China, in India, in Russia. In Europe, it's an average. In France, we are in a relatively good situation, because we have a very strong nuclear generation, sorry for that. And we only, on average, are only emitting 32 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, instead of 900 grams in China.